Hello, my name is Ella Cockrell. This is my work. It's titled Portraits of Light. So through these paintings, I'm exploring the fluidity of memory. Before this project, I had a lot of questions for myself, a lot of big questions. I was thinking, why do I paint? What do I want to say through my paintings? And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that I just really enjoy the process of painting. I found that I never really connected with like a linear way of painting. Even though I don't think, when you set out to paint, you really never end up, exactly where you think you're going. But I really found that I enjoyed painting and not knowing where my painting was going to take me, but enjoying the process. And I was really interested and excited by this element of mystery. So I really wanted to explore that in these pieces. I wanted to explore that in the process and also the content. I wanted to kind of explore the things that interest me and I find to be mysterious. And then also in the final painting, I wanted to convey this sense of mystery. I've always been interested in memory. I think I'm someone who is constantly thinking about the past and finds a lot of comfort in my past memories. And I became really interested in learning about the process of memory. I took a psychology class and I found it really interesting that memories become less accurate as you recall them and the more you access them. So I wanted to explore this idea and see how I could convey this visually. So I knew that I wanted to incorporate photographs from my childhood, but I also wanted to explore the mystery of painting and the painting process. So I started both of these paintings just intuitively and working abstractly. So I started by choosing a color palette. I was thinking about light and shadow and this idea of fading memories. So I was really interested in these kind of glimmery pastel golden colors and then these like hazy shadowy colors. And here I'm working with acrylic. So I'm working first in watered down washes and then working in thin glazes. I really wanted to convey this idea that if you reached into the painting, it would just slip through your fingers. So when it came to the process of incorporating elements from photographs from my childhood, I didn't want them to be exact reproductions. So I started with the abstract process and just worked without an idea of the photographs that I would eventually incorporate. So I just started by painting and seeing what would happen. And then the process of incorporating these photographs was actually very spontaneous. For this first painting, I had done the abstract piece and I didn't really know what memories I wanted to draw from, what photographs I wanted to incorporate. And it wasn't until I had a very spontaneous moment. So one day, this was a few weeks into the semester, I was bringing some art books up to the studio and I actually had a photograph just fall out of this book. And it was just a really spontaneous moment. And the more that I looked at the photograph, the more I could see this abstract piece in the photograph. The lights and the darks of this painting and the shadows and the lights in the photograph, I thought really connected. So I started to work in some of the elements of that photograph into this piece. So for this painting, I feel like the process of finding a photograph to work from, it felt like very spontaneous, like I said. It felt like just being reminded of an old memory suddenly. And with the second painting, it was a different process. It was a bit more frustrating. It was almost like trying to remember something, but knowing that it's not quite right. And this process, I had the abstract painting and I really struggled to find a photograph that I felt really connected with it. So after I incorporated these elements from the photograph into these paintings, I So I added in some of these elements. I added in like the figures and the sky or the tree line for this one. And then after that, I put the photograph away. And then I kind of returned to that first step in the process and just worked intuitively and kind of deconstructed and reconstructed. And it was surprising to see how much of the photo remained. Like this one, I feel like it kind of maintained the original photo more, and the second one kind of faded away more, like a fleeting memory. So through this process of painting, it really felt like a process of remembering. And I really enjoyed sitting with these photographs and really going through the process of remembering and also kind of being taken on this journey with the paint kind of having a mind of its own. So moving forward, I really want to explore the process of painting and kind of use it as a way to explore things that I'm interested in and explore these ideas. Thank you. So the question was, what unexpected challenges did I face with these paintings? I think I tried to kind of embrace the idea of the challenges because I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted these paintings to look like, but I definitely did have some challenges. One big challenge that I had was that I originally was planning to make this there were supposed to be 3 paintings. But after putting them up on the gallery wall, I decided to take one out. I think that was an unexpected challenge, but I just kind of decided that I liked the way these two played off of each other. Yeah, so that was definitely an unexpected challenge. The third painting. Yeah, the third painting is in our secret salon in the back of the gallery.
So earlier you mentioned that you chose the color palette prior to starting the painting. How did you go about choosing those colors for each?
I think I was really thinking. Oh yes, the question was, how did I go about choosing the color palette? I think I really just was thinking a lot about like the feeling that I wanted to convey. So for me, when I think of kind of like my memories and kind of this idea of like nostalgia, I really think of like deep purples, kind of like cloudy, shadowy colors. Yeah, so I think it's kind of like associating emotions with colors. Yes.
What was the experience of painting these memories like for you? Like as you went on, were you able to remember more about these times?
Yeah, the question was, as I was painting, was I able to remember more from these times? Yeah, I think that was really interesting because I didn't start this process with like a specific memory or a specific photograph in mind. It really was just kind of like, you know, just finding these photographs. So originally when I looked at these photographs, both of these are when I'm like really young. So I didn't remember like that day or that specific time. But I think the more that I sat with it, I felt like I remembered more. I don't know if I actually was remembering more, if it just felt like I did. But yeah, that was a really interesting part of it.
As you're working on the process oriented, I think your relationship with the materials changed at all over the course of the project?
Yeah, I think so. The question was because sorry, can you repeat? I feel like you said it better than I could.
Oh, yeah, you're like working process first, your relationship with the materials.
So the question was, did my relationship with the materials change because I'm focusing more on the process? I think so. I think I definitely wanted to. I knew that like the way that I wanted to work was more thin and fluid. But I also think that because I was trying to be more experimental and kind of work from what was happening on the canvas, I tried to try out new things and implement that in the painting. So I definitely learned a lot more from this process. Yes.
scale and proportion. I think really in relation to how we experience the body, how that changes through the process of thinking. So the initial question is why this size, why this shape, and then we have to start with something like this, and how much we can access from that, and then what thinking does. And take it into that.
Yeah. So the question was, why did I choose this size, this scale, these shapes for the canvas? That's an interesting question because since I wasn't thinking about the photographs when I started. Originally, I wanted these all to be vertical. I think that was just something I envisioned in my mind. But as I was kind of like painting from like an intuitive place and painting more abstractly, I was flipping the canvas a lot. And then when I sat down with the photographs and wanted to start working from them, I ended up kind of flipping the canvas again. But I think the reason why I chose this size, I guess I was just drawn to it. And then it was just kind of interesting to see how that worked with the photographs. But I think to your other part of your question about working from smaller photographs, I think that was a really big part of it was, looking at these tiny photographs in comparison to these large paintings. I was able to kind of look at the photographs kind of as they exist as like almost abstract in a sense, because you can't really see all of the details. And then kind of picking out what kind of details I wanted to add and then having to make stuff up to fill in the gaps.
I have just a question about the secret salon painting, which we'll see later.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very different from these. And I would to talk a little bit with you to talk about like you had an expectation of how a series happened, and then how did this very unexpected painting happen? And what's your response to it now? Because I know you were ambivalent about it. A lot of us thought it was very dynamic. So
yeah, I think that painting was interesting because it was the last painting that I did. So I had these done, and even though I say that I like didn't have like an idea of what I wanted these paintings to look like, these kind of ended up feeling like how I wanted them to feel. But that last painting definitely didn't feel how I expected it to feel. It's a lot more, like you said, dynamic, I guess. And I think with that painting, I was definitely more experimental. It was, I made a lot of choices early on that were very different than these. But yeah, that one is very interesting. I still don't know how I feel about it. Yeah, we will. Yes. So we will go to the salon at the end of the Zoom. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Jacob Barter. I am a artist, I guess. I primarily work in glass, but I also have experience in metal and ceramics and other random forms of mixed media that I can get my hands on. this is my piece. It is the largest thing I've made, and I'm including the wall because with a lot of help, I had to build it on my own with help. But I mean, I originally wanted to take a wall that was in this gallery and then break it, but that was not allowed. So I had to build the wall myself, and that process was interesting because I built the frame pretty early on in the semester and had to wait to complete the wall until the last show was out, because I had to complete building it in here. So I'm gonna first start talking about my process and how this was built, because that's really the only thing that I'm interested in. The only thing that really gets me out of bed in the morning, artistically, has really nothing to do with the explanations or the writing about it, or really explaining myself. If you read my artist statement, you can kind of get the gist of it. So my favorite part by far is the glass. It was blowing the glass, and glass has been my passion since the first time I saw the furnace door open. And you'll hear that a lot, and that's very cliche, but it is so true. It's really the only thing that gets me out of bed in the mornings. It's getting better at glass. I think I had that realization that it is my passion pretty recently. And I think I've been sort of avoiding it for a long time, just recognizing that. And with the help of my friends last summer, I sort of came to that and accepted it as fact. And just the future in my mind is far less scary with such a dream. I think that the downside to finding this is that I have to somehow make art out of it to justify my time here. So during the entire semester before this wall thing, I spent it with Nigel blowing all of these pieces, and they are what I like to do is vessels. I like craft, and it has a Scavo surface treatment that it's a chemical process which ages the glass hundreds of years in a matter of seconds, and it's amazing to watch the chemical plumes sort of just totally fill the hot shop, and it's kind of toxic and scary, but I can be too at times, so I sort of resonated with that. And in there, so my previous forms of art that I've been forced to do, I think I've always leaned into the degraded, the corroded, the patinaed, it's just the old. And I think that fascination with old things being interesting is something I think about a lot. Like, why is it interesting? Is it interesting just because it's old, or what can we make new that is already old, just to sort of take advantage of that dynamic? I think the part that I most enjoyed doing in this process, other than the glass, was not building the wall in a matter of 2 weeks. It was breaking it. And if we're going to get into meaning, which I'm doing so under duress, but I know some of you are interested. I've been a very destructive person as a child. I was my parents, God bless their souls for still loving me. I was a terror. I've I've learned that just doesn't only hurt people around me, it hurts myself. And I think channeling that into something other than something so outwardly destructive and inwardly destructive is to put it in this sort of artistic outlet that I wish I didn't have to share, but I know it's part of art is sharing it. Here we are. I think during the reception, the thing I was most excited about was I think a lot of the students understood and resonated with what I had to say, and a lot of the faculty had questions. But it's here now. We got some parking tickets in here. Another way of sort of letting go of my rage. I won't get into that spiel, but
Let's see the video.
Yeah, so what I enjoyed most about the reception was hearing people say, why does this belong here? Is this art? Like, was this supposed to happen? And I think if I was to share one inspiration that I have taken from art history, it is learning about Marcel Duchamp and what he has done to art, which is just make people cringe and ask questions and question themselves. If they make it that far, they can just be offended, which is totally cool. I guess to end, I wanted this to look like something that, not something that I made, but something that happened. Thank you. Yes.
So since the show has your thought or your feeling towards the institution has changed.
Yes. Yeah, I spent a lot of time totally just talking badly about it and really releasing it. But at the very end of this day, I realized that none of this would have been possible without it. I think that's really the beauty of institutions, is that it gives people access to create and to learn and to share. And the greatest thing about the artistic institution is that something like this can happen and it is celebrated. But if that was to happen in math or science or history, doing something contrarian is almost like signing your career death warrant, you know? More questions, please. Yes.
When I look at it, doesn't seem that outrageous to me. Maybe if it was like 40 years ago, but I don't know. Why do you think it's outrageous?
Because I think one of the biggest problems this institution has is it does not teach what you can do with art. It teaches you what has been done and to emulate that. I think there are a few professors out there that, especially if you really get to know them, will encourage this sort of growth.
Why are you pursuing that?
I'm pursuing a degree because I originally started as an English major because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I was going downhill very fast and needed some sort of structure. And then I found glass and I found this huge glass community with all these resources and all these friends, and I think I belong here for that, but not so much the academia. And it would be sort of like running 19 miles in a marathon and just turning around and walking back. You know, I'm pretty close, sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
It's one.
Yes.
Did you destroy any glass pieces in the process?
Yes, I lost 2.
Accidentally or by intent?
I sort of left out that part of the process, which was very destructive, and I'm surprised this many of them survived, because I would soften them up with a hammer, and then I would take the vessel and just beat it into the wall until it was pressure fit and pretty solid, and then I would take it out, line some glue, and then one more good hard ram. And 2 of them did not like that. They must have had some sort of internal stresses I couldn't see. And I was expecting it. And I was kind of happy when it happened, because I wanted it a little bit deep inside. Yes.
A question is just a comment that hopefully someone gets, but when you were saying that what it meant when you discovered Marcel Duchamp, I thought you were about to say Marcel. There's no binding. I think it's brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really.
So you have one of the more conceptual works of art in the gallery, actually. So I know that you're pushing back against some conceptualism, but probably the strongest conceptual statement. Do you feel like you changed your perspective on conceptual art now that you're doing performance, destroying walls?
I think so. I think this is the first project that I've got that was not guided by some rigid project goal. And because this class was like, do what you want, you got to pay for it. And you and Micah, I tried my hardest to get you both to say no, and I rarely heard. And I was just like kind of disappointed. There wasn't more of a fight, and I started running out of things. But I thank you for that. Deeply, I thank you.
Like I said, LOL.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about like audience perception and how you appreciate it, or you disagree with what they said, or just like how the reaction to what the audience is saying, like what was in their reaction.
Thank you for that question.
And
Again,
maybe repeat the question.
oh yes. So how do I feel about how others interpreted my art versus what I intended? I have very personal reasons for making art. I think that's where I get a lot of my fuel for creation. But the end of that, the reason I do it is for other people to come to their own conclusions and their own questions and their own interpretations. And that's another reason why I don't like explaining art and I don't like writing about it, is because it confines it in this little box, this prison, where it's not that it doesn't allow others to make their own interpretations, but it certainly makes it harder. And that's like why I still do art and want to do it in the future and not just switch to craft and hide in the woods. Thank you. Good question.
Any other questions?
Gosh.
If you were going to give the institution a method to get better, What would be a suggestion?
Less rules. And less rules. Rules are important, okay? but less rules that only exist to protect the institution's existence. Or rules that exist solely for themselves and solely for the sake of itself. I don't know how else to describe that, but I think a lot of this, a lot of the things that I don't agree with, a lot of the policies and whatnot are just for the institution's survival and has nothing to do with its growth. Yes.
That has to do with the stuff in the second one.
Yes.
Repeat the question though too, in case people.
Does that what I said have anything to do with what I stuffed in there? And yes.
What is all in the wall?
Just various parking paraphernalia.
Parking tickets.
I don't know why everyone's laughing. I think I look perfectly normal.
I think we'll go on. We're gonna be looking at Hannah's work next, so right here, then we can all stay here, just like give a little space around it at the top. There.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Ishikawa and my project is titled History Lessons at Lunchtime, and it represents my personal journey of inner conflict and reconciliation with my Japanese American identity. And growing up during a time when Japanese culture was gaining popularity in America due to the influence of anime, manga, technology, I kind of gained a natural attraction to Japanese things, which slowly developed into a very deep love for Japanese culture. And one of the hobbies that I kind of picked up during this time was bento making. And I remember spending hours just looking through Japanese bento box cookbooks and trying to recreate all the bentos that I saw with things at home. And I think for me, bento making was a way for me to express my creativity while also connecting to my cultural heritage. And even as a fourth generation Japanese immigrant, I felt a really deep connection to Japan through its culture. And my parents, on the other hand, they did not possess the same sentiments toward Japan as I did, due to its modern history of aggression and war that took place during my grandparents' time, which I was completely unaware of growing up. And learning about this generational difference in perspective made me feel really sad and just frustrated and disappointed. And at first I was in denial and extremely resistant in trying to learn about its past, just because it kind of had the potential to taint and I guess disregard everything that I enjoyed, like growing up as a kid. But I soon realized that in order to confront the uncomfortable feelings I was experiencing, I needed to study Japanese history and culture in more depth, in order to understand where my parents were coming from, and then also to obtain a more complete view of Japan, instead of just focusing on like the positive aspects or the more superficial aspects of it. And so I ended up taking some Japanese history and culture classes here at UH Mānoa, and also while studying abroad in Japan. And these experiences were extremely eye-opening for me, and caused a major shift in my overall view of Japan and certain aspects of its culture. And one of the things that I was really surprised and bothered by was Japan's violence before and during World War II. And it was really shocking to learn about these atrocities and their erasure over time. And this is what kind of led me to create this body of work. And so my work represents the tension between my love for Japan as a child and the sadness I feel about the darker parts of its history, all of which I'm still processing to this day. It's extremely challenging to express the breadth and depth of this multi-layered topic, and I'm still learning how to do so. So this project is kind of just like a snapshot into my current understanding and perspective. So my project is a series of bento box dioramas, which represents my childhood love for Japanese culture, but also expose difficult parts of Japanese history. So the 10 bento boxes are arranged in chronological order, and each bento represents an event in history before and during World War II. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into all the bentos, but I can give you a brief overview of the timeline of these events. And for those of you here, you can also scan the QR code to read more about each bento story. But these first two bento boxes depict Japan's use of propaganda during the 1930s to further their goal of colonizing Asia to ultimately protect them and themselves from Western powers. And this effort to protect actually ended up leading to injustices against other Asian nations, which are depicted in these next 4 bentos. So they flow this way. And these bentos shed light on the war crimes committed by Japan during the 1930s and 40s, such as human experimentation in China, the Nanking Massacre, and the forced prostitution of women and girls, known as comfort women, as well as the forced labor of civilians and prisoners of war to build the Burma Railway. And these atrocities committed by Japan rivaled those committed by Western powers. And then these last 4 bento boxes, they depict events during World War II. And this includes the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the internment of Japanese Americans, the creation of Japan's first full-length animated film as a form of propaganda, and then the bombing of Hiroshima and its aftermath. And in depicting these events, I subvert cute imagery often used in bento boxes by using it to depict violent events of the past. And this juxtaposition reveals my inner struggle to reconcile feelings of appreciation and disappointment. And for the bento boxes, I found these paper storage boxes from Daiso, and I painted them with a mix of gouache and white acrylic in order to achieve a soft and inviting color palette that is often used in bento making. And I used gouache for the drawings since it really allowed me to lay out those flat areas of color while also rendering fine details and texture of the foods. And the events I chose to focus on informed the imagery, the food, and the color choices, and the composition of each bento box. For example, in this bento box specifically, it's titled 1932 to 1945. I chose to highlight Korean comfort women who were forced into sexual slavery by including an image of a statue built in Korea in front of the Japanese embassy to commemorate these women. And these statues are extremely controversial in Japan, and Japan has made many efforts to have them taken down. And so, this specific type of Korean bento box called doshirak is a bento made with rice and sausages and side dishes like kimchi and then stir-fried anchovies. And then it's usually packed in this gold-colored container. And before eating, the consumer would cover it with a lid and shake it vigorously to mix the ingredients inside. And by doing so, the image of the statue would be completely erased. And so this process is kind of how I constructed each bento box, which all tell a different story. And I guess my intent for this body of work was not to condemn Japan for its sins of the past, but ultimately to lament what has happened in order to acknowledge and understand the suffering of others. While the people of Japan today are not responsible for the actions of their ancestors, I think history still haunts Japan due to their failure to fully address and due to their failure to fully address their past wrongs. And the resentment still exists between Japan and its former colonies. For example, in popular culture, globally, a lot of people make subtle criticisms about Japan. And after its defeat in World War II, Japan devoted itself to building a more favorable global image through the use of soft power. And Japan has become known now for its kawaii or cute image through popular culture. And in the process of creating a new identity, Japan has kind of failed to come to terms with its former self and buried its history of violence, and which has affected many people around the world. And then I just think it's really heartbreaking to realize that many of the victims that were affected by them, they waited many decades or even died before they received any sort of recognition or apology from Japan. And I guess while Japan has yet to adequately address their wrongdoings, I am encouraged by the efforts of Japanese artists and individuals who are working to educate themselves and future generations. For example, in many of the anime shows that I watch, the story writers incorporate themes of war and corruption, discrimination, prejudice, and the pursuit of peace and understanding. And I think this shows that parts of Japan's history are being reflected within popular culture itself. And then another example of this is a Japanese history teacher who started collecting testimonies of the Nanking Massacre after learning about Japan's role in it. And she actually ended up receiving death threats for this because I think many people are still very resistant to acknowledging their past. And these examples show that like artists and individuals are really the ones bringing up these topics. And I think that they should be recognized for their efforts. And I also believe that the education of Japanese students needs to be expanded in order to include a more complete view of Japanese history. And I think, of course, there's no really easy way to remedy the situation or, I guess, heal from these traumas. But I think the least that Japan can do is educate their children, and so that the victim stories are not forgotten. And hopefully by bringing these truths into the light, future generations can be aware of their place in history and create a context of reconciliation moving forward. And similarly to this, I think in my own independent research and the creation of this project, it really helped me to reconcile my own conflicting feelings about Japan. As someone who was first resistant to learning and admitting the truths of Japanese history, this project shows me that it's possible to hold space for feelings of both respect and resentment. And in processing what I've learned, I realized that I can appreciate Japanese culture while also acknowledging the reality of Japan's complex history. So yeah, thank you.
I have a question about the QR code, and we're going to take the camera over it. Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about the QR
Yeah,
code?
so this QR code is it links to a bento box like cookbook that I created inspired by the cookbooks I grew up reading. And so like the format, design, and like the ordering of it is all inspired by that. And basically it's kind of acts like as an informational guide for while viewing these bento boxes, and it details each historical event through writing, and in order to give the viewer like an idea as to how I constructed the bentos and what the specific food items mean in each piece. And I think it kind of just adds to, I guess, the viewing experience and like understand where I'm coming from, I guess. And so, yeah, if you guys want to take a look.
You can walk up and open a QR code. You can walk up after asking questions and look closer at the pieces. I know everybody's taking her just during the talk, but if anybody wants to come up and take a close look and ask questions about any of the specific bento boxes, please do.
Thank you. Danny.
I want to ask, who do you think your intended audience is for this?
So the question was, who do I think my intended audience is for this project? And at first, it started out as educating. I need to educate Japan's like youth and children in order for like, I guess, the wrongdoings of Japan to not be repeated throughout history. And I think that was like a very lofty goal of mine, honestly, because I don't know. I think I'm not a historian. Like, I don't know what actually happened. I wasn't there. So I think the best thing I can do really is to express my experience, and hopefully that can educate others. It doesn't have to be specifically Japanese children or Japanese people, but I think if anyone can learn something from this, I think that's really what makes this project worth doing. And I think, yeah, I guess like I've been hearing feedback from a lot of people, and people from like different backgrounds and ethnicities, and just like hearing their feedback has been really encouraging, and it's cool to see. Yeah.
And the piece is going to Box Jelly, right?
Yes.
Display.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Kirsten, and then Randy.
I've known Anna for a while.
Yeah.
And she always had incredible rendering skills from day one. And it's amazing that you've taken those rendering skills and added such incredible historical and conceptual underpinnings.
Thank you so much.
It's amazing. And I just wanted to say, I remember from some of our conversations, and other people have told me this, correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but after World War II, there was some propaganda made by the government, correct? And I think this is one of the characters over there, or similar to one of the characters.
Yeah, similar.
Kind of make the war crimes and so on seem more, I guess, cute and palatable a little bit.
It's definitely seen in this one too, the anime film. Yeah.
But sort of related to that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said that with bento, which I don't know a lot about, so a lot of times things are made to look like other things. Like, for example, the hot dog is obviously not a hot dog. And just conceptually, it's really interesting that you chose bento, where things are made to look like other things.
Oh yeah.
Which also relates to the, the animation or the cartoons that were put out that were basically saying, "Oh, it's okay."
I never thought of it in that way, but that's really cool.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I actually, my question is around the bento element of this more than the rest. It seems like you're working in drawing / thinking / illustration, and there's a bento reference there, and but bento has taken on a whole other shape 3-dimensionally, presentation 3-dimensionally. And I wonder how you negotiated that in terms of your own discipline and choice of these boxes, and how, how to present them, presenting flat, and, would you want to tilt them? Is there some part of you that's thinking, okay, maybe this could be something more dimensional?
Okay, so the question was kind of like, I guess like about the bento box itself, and how I kind of went about deciding how to present the drawings and construct these bento boxes. So I guess initially I was thinking like just like flat drawings, but I think that I kind of shot that down immediately, because I think if it was just a flat drawing, it would kind of, the viewer would automatically say like, oh, what is this piece trying to convey? Whereas like, if it was like 3-dimensional like this, I think the first impression would be, oh, it's a bento box. And like, you would want to get a closer look. And I think by depicting it in a way that is more realistic, you kind of are drawn to the actual like food itself and like yeah, just the whole bento aspect itself. And then but then as you look at the bentos, you kind of see like there's a story, there's a narrative, and it kind of like sneaks up in you as you look at it. So I kind of wanted to draw the viewer in through that bento aspect, and then kind of through that point, I guess explain a story to them. And yeah, I don't know if that answered that question.
Did you ever think of making them as actual bentos?
I actually thought about that. I don't know if I have the skills to make these as actual bentos, but I think that'd be really fun to try to do as an activity. Yeah, it's a good idea though.
So you mentioned
Mhm.
how involved were your parents to, was that something that they kind of guided you on, or something that you had to put yourself into a journey?
Okay, yeah. So the question was, she noticed that I said I'm a 4th-generation Japanese immigrant, and she was wondering how involved my parents and grandparents were in kind of submerging myself into like my culture as a Japanese American. I would say like my parents themselves, they weren't really raised in I think they, even though their parents like spoke a little bit of Japanese and they like ate like Japanese food and stuff, they didn't really practice like Japanese like traditions and customs, or like they didn't really get into Japanese culture, mostly because during that time they were kind of encouraged to assimilate into American culture. Also like local Hawaii culture is different from American culture and Japanese culture. So it's kind of like a mix of cultures that they grew up in. So when I was born, in the house that I was raised in, we mostly like we didn't really like practice a lot of like Japanese traditions. And I kind of had to seek this out on my own. So like learning the language, and then like watching like Japanese shows, and like I guess all of these interests I had to seek out on my own. And I think yeah, I think they sorry, they definitely like played a role in like encouraging me to do so. But I think it was mostly like my own desire to connect with my culture. So yeah. Okay, and the follow-up.
The institution kind of helped you encourage you to get into this art form.
Okay, and then her question was, do you think the institution kind of helped me get into this art form? I think it definitely did. Just I think through like my drawing classes and like just like history classes and learning how to create a meaningful piece. I think I learned how to ultimately like tackle abstract concepts in my work. And that's something I didn't do previously. As a child, I would just kind of draw what I see, draw like pretty things. And I think through this project and through like the institution, and I learned how to kind of express this very complicated topic through like, I guess, different mediums. Yeah. Thank you.
I just thought that was really interesting to think about your generation in relation to the internal kind of model minority generation. I'd love to see where that research could go.
For
Yeah,
sure.
that's a good
Yeah.
point too. Where are you going next?
For the future,
Are you gonna keep exploring Japanese culture? Are you gonna leave the bento box or continue doing them?
I think in the future, I definitely want to explore different aspects of Japanese culture and kind of, I don't know, I definitely want to branch out for sure and learn more about, because this is just like one part of Japanese history. It had like, there's a whole like range of topics I could focus on and explore. So yeah, I'm kind of excited where this project will take me in the future. Yeah. Yeah.
And Mila and
Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Eduardo Joaquin. This is my work here, Rite of Passage. So to start, I was born in the Philippines, but moved here from a really early age. Moved here when I was 7. So growing up as an immigrant was pretty tough. I always felt like an outsider as a kid. I felt like the strong desire for just acceptance in the spaces that I occupied. Eventually, like I learned how to get pretty good at fitting in, but in doing so, I slowly began to shed my background, my identity. Eventually, I felt like I lost who I was. I no longer was able to speak my first language, which was Tagalog. I lacked knowledge of like where I came from. I no longer abided by like the traditions, morals, values that I was raised on. I was just, I guess, trying to conform as much as possible to the new place that I resided in. So what I've like now come to realize is that I no longer exist
neither here nor there, no longer like a part of where I once was, but also not feeling like I'm quite a part of where I am now. It almost felt like I was stuck in this sort of like cultural purgatory. So this idea sort of started to manifest in my work. Like the figures in my work, while feeling familiar, started to like slowly dissolve into the background, slowly started to like dissolve into the space that they occupied. My work became a means to show how like the figure assimilates into the space, but in doing so, losing parts of itself. But as I entered here in UH, I was able to enroll in like Filipino language and culture courses, and it allowed me to like slowly regain a little bit of what I had lost. I also started to utilize painting as a means to explore my like these themes of culture, my identity, and that journey led me to this work here, Rite of Passage. So as a painter rooted in the Western tradition of oil painting, but with a Filipino American identity, these tensions sort of started to manifest in my work. Rite of Passage here is sort of an attempt to confront these tensions. So the work itself is informed by the writings of a late 19th century ethnographer, Arnold van Gennep. So he innovated the term rite of passage. So it's a triptych. It's structured around the three phases of rites of passage. So the first phase being separation, where an individual is separated from their community to undergo a rite or a ritual. It's a symbolic detachment or cutting away of the former self. Then second phase being liminality, where the individual goes through a transformative transition, having left one state, but yet to arrive at the other. And the third phase being reintegration, where the individual is brought back to the community with their newly assumed identity, often with a newfound knowledge or wisdom to share with the community. So the work itself draws a lot from mythology, folklore, religion, spiritualism. The folklore and mythology of the Philippines they're very much rooted in a rich oral tradition, but because of that, there's a sort of absence of like a visual history related to it. So we're all familiar with like the Western tradition of painting and its relationship to mythology and religion. We've all seen Adam and Eve, David Goliath, Birth of Venus, what have you. So all of the old masters have had their own sort of interpretations of myth and religious narratives from like a Western context. So I think that sort of thing was a catalyst for like embarking on this work. Just feeling like there was an absence of that when it came to like my own culture. So through this work, I'm able to share these stories to a wider audience, but I'm also able to learn more about like my own identity. So with that, kind of take a look at some of the panels. So the first panel here, it represents the first stage, like I mentioned, separation. There's this figure here. So it's a dog with a boar's skull. It references like the story of Ma'anam, which is a Filipino myth about a mischievous boy who's always playing pranks and getting into trouble. One of those pranks being putting a boar's skull on his dog. So his like careless behavior and insolence towards nature eventually angers the gods. So he kind of just ignores it. It's like, oh, whatever, I don't really care. I don't think there's gods anyways. Because of that, like it causes the destruction of his village. So I decided to use that to kind of like allude to this sort of like naivety or sort of immaturity that comes from like an individual that has yet to undergo like the transition or the rite of passage. So kind of that first panel. Moving on to the second panel, it represents the second stage, which is liminality. So in this panel, I decided to utilize the symbolism of the boat and water. It's a way to kind of represent a transition, transformation, rebirth. So like the earliest settlers of the Philippines, they lived in communities called barangay states. So the word barangay is still used to this day to sort of, it's used kind of like in the same way we would use like your district area, your hood. It originates from the word balanghay, which is a type of boat. So these like pre-colonial communities relied heavily on port trade and seafaring. So like all basically their entire lives revolved around the sea and the ocean. So this was reflected in like their art and motifs. One of our national treasures is the manunggul jar. It's the ceramic burial jar that dates back to like 700, 800 BC. It's considered like one of the most, like historic masterpieces of like our nation. It's even on our 1,000 peso bill. So like on top of the jar, there's these two figures riding a boat, and the boat motif is utilized to represent like a vehicle into the afterlife. So I decided to utilize like that boat motif here as a sort of way to like allude to like that transition. So yeah, water also very symbolic in terms of rebirth, cleansing, purifying. I see the figure on the boat as going through almost like a baptism of sorts. So they're cleansing themselves with a tabo, which is commonly used in the Philippines as like, because we have like no hot running water, that's kind of like a common way to bathe. So yeah, I see the central panel almost like a doorway. It's a doorway between two places. So I decided to kind of make the size and scale the exact same size and scale as the studio, like the door in my studio that we worked in this entire semester. And finally, at the last panel, to represent the final stage of the rites of passage, which is reintegration, I decided to paint a bolete tree or a banyan tree, as you guys might know. So bolete trees hold a very spiritual significance in the Philippines. They're known to be dwellings for supernatural beings or spirits. So in like pre-colonial societies, there were these shamans or spiritual healers called the babaylan. They were healers and mediators of the spirit world, and they were in charge of like important rituals. So it was believed that those chosen to be babaylan would undergo a journey into like the ancestral realm, where they would go to gain some sort of sacred knowledge. And once they succeeded in their journey, they would reappear on top of a bolete tree. So I kind of wanted to use the bolete tree to represent that sort of return and that kind of coming back to like a community with this newfound knowledge. So yeah, my journey as a painter has become like a means of sort of like a redemption. It allowed me to undergo a transformative process to accept myself, understand that like these tensions that I've been feeling and struggling with all culminate to a singular identity that's, unique to myself and solely my own. So I like see this work as a rite of passage in itself. It marks like a transition, a transformation. The intention behind it was to embark on a body of work that was deeply personal, that spoke to my experience and my journey as a painter, a student, as a person, to coming of age, a hero's journey, a rite of passage. But in creating this work that was so deeply personal, what manifested was something that spoke to this universal story. If it resonates or speaks to even just a single person, I don't know. I think I would consider the work a success. So, yeah, thank you. Thanks.
So you talk about the scale and the size of the middle panel and the significance of a transition between two spaces. What about the scale and size of the level?
And repeat the question.
Oh yeah. So Ray asks about the size and scale, how I mentioned the size and scale of the central panel. Is there anything that I did with the size and scale of the other two panels? Nothing like too particular as compared to the central one. I was also looking at a lot of altar pieces. Like they're usually triptychs that kind of fold over in itself. But I found it interesting how altar pieces, usually the center panel is a more like square ratio, and the two panels at the end were more sort of vertical and smaller. So I kind of am doing like the reverse in this one. Micah?
Where you were working on thinking about color in the last body of work, you speak a bit about your choices?
Yeah, so Micah asked about my choice of color and thinking about color in this triptych. So initially, I was thinking a lot about, I guess, nature and the elements. So for sure, the central panel was definitely inspired by water. I started the underpaintings, each in a specific color, so blue to represent water. And eventually it sort of shifted, I guess, responding to like the other two panels, green, nature, of course, and then this first panel being fire, red, orange. It was interesting because like, as I was kind of thinking about like color and thinking about like the elements, I started to realize that like the story almost kind of mimicked like a life cycle. Could see this as like a birth, you know, there's sort of like, I guess you could kind of represent that as like a womb and then a death and then an afterlife. So it's also sort of cyclical, like the tree reappears there. So I just wanted to use color to kind of like allude to like those themes. So yeah, that answers what you're talking about. And Flo.
So first two panels has figures. Is there a reason why you didn't include a figure on your last one?
Yeah, so the question was, the first two panels have a figure, but the last one doesn't. Is there a reason why? So I guess I kind of like touched on that a bit. Thinking about, again, that sort of idea that it's also kind of represents like a life cycle. This being birth, death, and like the afterlife. I kind of like thought, you know, it's, who knows what really happens. All that we really know is, I don't know, like we return to the earth. So I kind of wanted to have that in this final panel. And also because I wanted to use like the tree to symbolize that the Babaylan and returning to, you know, this community. So I don't know, I think eventually when we all die, we return to the ground. And I don't know what grows out of that, but I guess that's kind of like why I decided to omit like a figure from the last panel. Kirsten?
It seems like a wild departure from your previous work to me, like, and I want to see why, because you pretty much explained that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a combination between Gustave Moreau and Peter Doig.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, do you think you'll continue in this vein, or what are you thinking?
Yeah. I mean, it was. Thank you. It was like the question was, it's quite a departure from my last work. It's sort of a cross between Moreau and Peter Doig, and if I'm going to continue sort of working in this manner. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of wanted to just depart as far as, not as far as I can, but kind of wanted it to be like a challenge. I wanted it to be like, this was like the first painting where I didn't have like a super strict plan. Usually if I'm like going about like a painting of this scale, I'll literally paint like a miniature version of it. And it's, you know, really, yeah, well, but the miniature version was in watercolor, so completely different medium. So it allowed me to, I guess, like experiment as much as possible in this sort of like, when working on it. So I really wanted to just bring in like everything that I've kind of like learned, but also like all the different ways I've painted. So I'm kind of like, you know, using a brush in some places. I'm kind of like using palette knife, scrapers, anything that I can kind of like throw at it, I threw at it. So that's kind of, I guess this was the result of that. I think going forward, I might sort of like pick and choose different aspects of it that I feel were like, you know, the most successful, and try to incorporate that in my work in the future. But in terms of themes and like subject matter, I think that's definitely like where I want to sort of be at in next coming works that I'm going to do.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, sure.
Because a lot of your previous work, you were deconstructing
Mm-hmm.
the figure,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a sense of realism, but the realism never fully settled in.
Mm-hmm.
It was fragmented. It was multiple directions.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like now everything is really solidly there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very solid narrative?
Yep.
Is this the deconstruction was, I remember conceptually was a bit about your feeling
Mhm.
not fitting in any
Yep.
place. Is this wholeness about like this coming full circle and fitting, realizing your identity? So I'm wondering if the formal aspects mirror the conceptual change with this painting.
Yeah, so the question was about how my work prior to this, a lot of the figures were deconstructed and broken apart, versus this one, the figures feel a lot more solid, and whether that had something to do with, like, I guess, my conceptual approach with this painting. And yeah, definitely. So I don't know, like, I kind of feel like I have a better understanding of like who I am after that, like all like this journey that I've gone through. And I guess it's represents a sort of like acceptance, and I don't know, feeling like I've kind of like, I don't know, accepted my position, whether that's in between two places, whether that's because of like, you know, these conflicts in my identity. I found that that's sort of what like makes me me, you know, and not to just fight, not to like fight that. It's okay to like not feel like you're, you know, completely a part of like these two places, and that you're sort of in between. So yeah, that's exactly like why I felt the figures should be more solid and fleshed out, and why there's such a clear narrative in this one. So yeah, cool. Any other questions?
Painters.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a lot. I tried a lot of like different things that like some successful, some not. One of my favorite things that I like found was pretty successful was, I don't know, for all the painters out there, you're taught to in that sort of academic kind of like traditional way where you build up the figure. You start with the transparent darks, and then you work opaquely with the lights. So for like a lot of the figures here, I like did the opposite, where like I started to go in pretty opaque with the darks, and then for the lights I would sand it away. So this, all of like the lights here was once dark, and I'm kind of like sanding back to that like light. So it's kind of like the opposite of like what they hammer into you in like intro, intermediate figure painting class and all that. So yeah, I don't know, it's kind of just like, okay, like what was I taught, and like how could I not do that? And like yeah, and I guess also like the with the drips, it's kind of become a like a cliche. It's always like, oh, you know, kind of to avoid like drips and stuff. And I'm like, let me see if I can like make that work, you know, like let's see how far I can push that, and see if I can kind of see what I can like get away with. So yeah, I don't know. It was really about like experimentation and just trying to like have a journey like through the painting, and really just like explore like everything that I've wanted to try but like never got a chance to. So yeah, it was fun.
So this painting is and the drip is a pivotal point of contention in painting, and you made illusionistic effects.
Yeah. So I was surprised. I was like, okay, like I'm glad that it kind of turned out like how I was hoping it would. But yeah, it was fun to explore these things and kind of like, yeah, challenge my approach and try to do things that, yeah, I was kind of like afraid of doing. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, hi. I'm Sarah Jansury, and this is my project Changes. And the basis of the project is focusing on decay and like decaying man-made objects. So I think my interest in decaying objects, especially man-made ones, came from growing up in New England. And if you've ever been there, there's like not a lot going on ever. So you kind of have to make your own fun. And I would spend like countless hours, especially in the summertime, exploring the area around my house. So it was completely overgrown by trees, but it used to be old historical farmland. So it used to all be pastures, and there would be, I think it was mostly sheep farms. But it's completely overgrown, and all that's left is rock walls and barbed wire, which they used to use to demarcate different like sections of land. And also in my explorations, I came across this old abandoned house up the street, and the first time I went there, it was standing completely, but the front face of it had collapsed in on itself. And so some of the floors had fallen into the basement, and the inside like appliances that had been left behind were pretty much they were the way they were when the people left. And you can really tell the age based on like the color and the style. And I really like old things because it makes you wonder and it keeps you guessing. And so I think that really sparked my curiosity in decay and the relationship between time and nature and man-made objects. And so my exploration from my childhood really ties into the way that I work today, because whenever I'm exploring, I'm constantly like looking for things that I think would make a good photograph. And so I got into photography when my uncle gave me my first film camera. And even though the first roll I ever shot was completely blank, I still wanted to get better and like actually learn how to use it and like hone my skills at photography. I go on tons of walks around my neighborhood, and I started noticing lots of decay. And obviously that's due to the wet climate here. And I think some people might find it ugly or unsightly, but I really wanted to use this project as a way to show that even things that are kind of ugly, they can, if you get close and really spend time with them, you can notice patterns and the beauty in it. And so, yeah, not only did I want to shoot around my neighborhood, but I wanted to explore around Oahu too. And so I went up to Mānoa. I went around my neighborhood in Mo'iliili. I went up to North Shore and like parts of like near Kualoa Ranch. And just, I brought my friends with me, and we were just seeing what we could find. But also bringing friends along for the journey is a big part of how I work too. And it's one of the things that I think about most when I'm photographing. Because like when I look at photographs, I don't just see the objects, I also see the memories of people I was going around with. And so I did this project completely in film. I think the film was Ilford HP 5 Plus, 400 speed. And I shot four or five rolls for the whole project. And so another reason I wanted to do this project in film is because I enjoy the process of developing film and printing in the darkroom. And if I shot this project in color, I think it would limit me just to inkjet prints. And I didn't want to do that. So these three small ones are silver gelatin prints, and then the rest I scanned and printed on the Epson inkjet printer that we have upstairs. I did a similar project for one of my other classes, but I did it digitally and in color. And I think sometimes color can distract from the shapes and forms and like textures of decay. And so it also helped that I did this project in black and white because I didn't want to distract from that. And then, yeah, after I printed them, I matted them all on black mat board. And this project was inspired by Alan Siskin's work because he did a lot of abstract photography, which was looked down on at the time because it was seen as too painterly. And if it's painterly, why not just make it a painting? But I think that sometimes photography can capture things in an abstract way that you just can't get with other medium. And so, yeah, and he just did whatever he wanted, which I also like about his work is that it keeps you guessing, and he didn't listen to people who were telling him no. But as for the abstract part, I think I just wanted, like, I want people to be interested and wonder about my work and ask more questions about like what the object is or like where I'm shooting. And so I think abstraction kind of brings those questions up. And then I was also inspired by Ansel Adams, not only because of his range of tones in his black and white prints, but also because he handles the camera really well in nature settings, which is really difficult to do when you can't control your light source, which is something I also had to fight with. I think I was lucky enough to have a couple of days where I was shooting that it was pretty cloudy outside. So the sun wasn't that big of a factor for me, which is, it really worked out, I think. I don't think there was a single day that it was sunny when I was out shooting. But yeah, I took these pictures over a course of a month, and then the rest of the time for this project was spent printing and editing photos and just matting everything. I think I would revisit this subject matter in the future. In a perfect world, I think I would have tried to photograph these objects like over time to see how they break down. But I didn't have like 10 years to do it. I only had like a couple months, so that obviously wasn't an option. But I think for sure in the future, I would try something similar, but do it over time. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
And they kept building, so I guess I'll go to the first shot, or the last one. You said that you didn't have enough time to look at them through time, and when you say that, I think about in terms of like how much change happens in a day, how much change happens in a week. Like we might think that it would be interesting. I guess it's more of a suggestion for the future idea of, what if you went back to these places each week? What kind of really subtle things might you find you did that?
Right.
Like taking the same photograph over and over during the same place. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And my other question was, you talked about the sun and cloudiness. Did you choose a particular time of day? Because the light's really different in the morning when you shoot photography versus in the afternoon. Were you interested in a certain kind of light?
Okay. The question was, did I think about different times of day, and did I choose specific times of day to go out and shoot? And I don't think I did, which would have been a good idea, I think, in hindsight. But I don't think I had a specific light that I wanted to shoot in. It just worked out in the way that it was really flat light. And so I didn't really have to contend with the sun. But I think if it wasn't cloudy on days that I was shooting, I would go either early in the morning or in the evening when the sun isn't directly above. Because I think sometimes it casts weird shadows and it does weird things to where like it would make the photograph blown out or like too bright. It's a hard thing to gauge, I think. It really depends on if there's clouds and stuff too.
Some of your photographs are very abstract that you get in so close you can't tell what the subject is, and then others you have a space and a context. And so, and I noticed people responding to them, and what I've seen are photographers, the number of photographers I've watched critique your work. And I noticed with photographers, they respond more to the contextual photos, whereas painters respond more to the ones where it becomes very abstract. And I was wondering if you could talk about your choice to mix these two, and then your thoughts about audience response to the photographs.
So the question was, how did I choose to, like which photos I chose to do more abstract and then more further back, and then
like why put them together?
Yeah, why put them together, and then if I thought about audience reaction. I think for me, I wanted to do a mix of both because I didn't want it to be too samey, if that makes sense. I think if you have too much abstraction, especially with the amount of photographs that I have, I think it would blend in together too much. And so I wanted to break up the abstract from the further away. But also with the amount of photos that I took and the camera roll that I had, I just wanted to see like what would fit well together. And I think having a mix of both makes it more cohesive, if that makes sense. But in regards to the audience reception, I didn't really think about that at all. But I think it makes sense that painters like abstract, and then photographers like more traditional, where you can like see what you're photographing in an object. I think that's what a lot of photographers do. That's why they respond that way to it.
Just, you said that you were saying that painters are really are drawn more to the abstract than photographers are drawn to really. I see painters as drawn to color, and at one point you referred to color that would have been a distraction. So I'm interested in your thoughts on color in relation to photography.
The question was, what are my thoughts on the relationship between color and photography? I think it's a tough one, especially like with more traditional media, like printing in the darkroom. For a long time, that was the only option. So I think people I think they enjoy like hearing like the traditions, or it's just like the way that you're taught, like you learn like the history of the medium. So I think that's maybe why people are more drawn to, especially photographers are drawn to black and white photography. But also color is a really hard thing to work with in photography too. It's like, especially when you're like editing photos, it's hard to get the exact color palette that you want. And so I think that's why sometimes, especially for me, like I'm like drawn away from color. And like a good rule is if it doesn't look good in color, you make it black and white. And if it doesn't look good in black and white, then it's not like a good photograph. Yeah.
Sorry, keep going. Well, on that topic, I guess I love this car one, and it's incredibly mysterious. It makes you wonder what's going on and what's happening. And I think it would be very different to color that car one.
Yeah, it would be less mysterious.
Yeah, it's incredibly mysterious, and the color would almost tell us too much somehow.
Yeah.
This question back there.
I guess, how did you decide what it is to put in what scale? Why?
Yeah, so the question was, why did I choose how did I choose which negatives to make bigger and which to make smaller? I think it's just based on which ones I like the most. So I think I wanted to do these 3 big because they were my favorite negatives. And also, I think if I had done, like, I made a smaller print of the car one, and I was looking at it, and I don't think the small size really did it justice. But yeah, I didn't want to do the ones that were like really abstract too big. Yeah, I don't really know other than that. These ones are my favorite, so I just made them big. And then the other ones just to surround it.
Hi everyone. I'm the last one. You can almost go home now. My name is Jui-Lien Sanderson. The tag there spell my name as Jui, but Jui pronounced as RAE. And it's an international translation, and don't ask me why, how it happened. So I'm originally from Taiwan, and I came to US in, I don't even remember what year I came to the US, but originally I went to San Francisco for art school, and a year later, I like to say I got into an accident, but that accident was, I got pregnant. So, and that delayed my completion of my art school 20 some years. So now my daughter is graduate from college, also from the school, and finished her master's degree. And I finally had a chance to come back to finish what I started. So this projects all start out as from my research in the civic engagement class, which was required by honors program. And by accepting for the presidential scholarship, I am required to be on the program. And we have to pick an issue that we care about to do research, interview activists, etc. So I decided to extend that research into my honors project, which also ties to my BFA project. So when we think of, or most people think of Hawaii, the image of ukulele, hula girl playing ukulele by the swaying palm tree on the beach, or native, greeting visitors with the lei, or just pristine blue turquoise water comes to mind. But the reality of Hawaii are often disguised by those romanticized images from travel industry. As a graphic designer, I used to work in a publishing company who capitalized on those romanticized images. So I'm complicit in perpetuating in that the false impression of Hawaii. The fact of the matter is that Hawaii has the highest per capita, one of the highest per capita rate of homelessness in the nation. Native Hawaiians are disproportionately affected. The cost of homelessness in general are economical difficulties, lack of affordable housing, or drug addiction, mental illness, so forth. But for Native Hawaiians, homelessness, there's another layer of complexity. My project, the paintings, investigate cost of the displacement of Native Hawaiians through the lens of historical events, political, social injustice, the impact of tourism, as well as the pollution and sustainability, because the health and the bounty of the land is really critical to the Native Hawaiian traditional way of life. So the purpose of these works are to bring the greater awareness to the historical facts and to the current political, social situations, and as well as the environmental, ecological, or sustainable issues in Hawaii. I dissected two of Eugene Savage's murals, Annexation and Festival of the Sea. By deconstructing and reconstructing his work, I created these contrasting realities that reflected the reality of today, which reflects the struggle of Native Hawaiians and the degradation of the environment and ecosystem. Savage is an American painter. He's known for his murals done under the Work Progress administration under the Frank Roosevelt administration. From 1938 to 1940, he was commissioned by Matson Navigation Companies to do 9 murals at size 4 foot by 8 foot for the purpose of decorating the passenger ship coming to Hawaii. Although the plan was disrupted by World War II, later on, those 9 images were converted to menu covers for other passenger ships to Hawaii. Just as many artwork done by Westerners during Hawaii Art Deco era, those Savage's work are fantasies. They are done to attract tourists for travel industry. In his annexation, he depict the event as this joyful or celebratory event participated by many Native Hawaiians in their westernized outfit
even Queen Liliuokalani was sitting on top of the foyer, seemingly happily handing over her nation to the United States. But the truth can be more contrary. The annexation was delayed by 2 petitions signed by 21,000 Native Hawaiians, which represent more than half of the Native Hawaiian population. Queen Liliuokalani herself went to Washington, D.C., petition for her nation. So the actual event, which in my reconstructing of the annexation, I interwoven the historical fact that incorporate the illegal overthrow by the group of businessmen with the help of the United States, with the current sovereignty movement by the Native Hawaiians. The central figure there represent Liliuokalani and holding the baby, which represent the future generations. In Eugene's Festival of the Sea, he depicts a Hawaiian king with his people celebrating the bounty of the land and the sea. And in my, I have to talk about the fact is, although it was a romanticized image, the bountiful of Hawaii was actually accurate according to literature. For example, Pu'uloa, which is current day Pearl Harbor, has over 30 some fish ponds and acres of taro fields patches. But today, that whole landscape's all changed. The Pearl Harbor surrounding area is covered with mangroves, and which kill off lots of native species. And the waters are polluted. And if you go to surrounding area of Pearl Harbor, the warning sign of contaminated fishes are everywhere. The fishes are contaminated by lead, mercury, or other poisons. So the my Festival of the Sea are a group of volunteers spending their weekends, weekdays, try to revive the area, clean out the mangrove, bring back the fish ponds, as well as clean out the marine debris. So I think by deconstructing and reconstructing Eugene's image, what I hope to achieve was to bring the this series or difficult situation we have into a more satirical dialogue, which I think probably easier to digest it and hopefully sinks deeper. And than the straightforward lecturing. Any questions?
I feel like these works have a lot of social critique in them. There's this kind of a heavy topic. Do you also think that there's an aspect of hope, or like?
Well, that was the reason I did this painting. When volunteers tried to clean up the area, and they did bring back some fish ponds and reintroduce a native species. Participants as young as kindergarteners were planting the native species back to the area. And they seems doing okay. So that's your little bit of hope.
The meaning of a containership in the background.
Thank you for asking that. Nancy was asking what's the meaning of the container ship in the background. The container ship signify our food. Most of our food, 85 to 90% of our food are imported, which is contrary to the old days when Hawaiian relying on the land to grow their own food. That's a sustainability issue.
On that, I think it's also a really clever tie back to Savage and the original purpose of the art that he made, because it's not then what he did was with medicine. And he was the energy trends that drove the misrepresentation in the first place. It's just
Thank you. Yeah, I did think about that. Thought about maybe I should put a matter on the container ship, but I thought that might be too obvious.
It was a brighter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks to the feedback of Professor Dressler to push back the ship to the background. So space or perspective wise, it looks much better.
I have a spatial question.
Okay.
Because the annexation taking, you've deconstructed the space and time. It's like multiple times, like a disruptive space, where this painting is more of a straight narrative. If you could talk about the difference in space and the choice of the two paintings.
Okay, so with the annexation, I want to incorporate the historical fact with the present day sovereignty movement. It's hard to bring that into one special plan because it's incorporating multiple places and time. So as you can tell by the facial expression of these people, there's not that much details on their facials because the relation of me to them, there's a distance. I don't really know them. Where on this painting, they look more real and have more details because I did volunteer and work alongside the people that tried to clean up the place. Cool.
So I think it's amazing that you're talking about these current issues, while living here in Hawaii. And like you mentioned, and I know that you're a Taiwanese descent. So why do you feel like it's important for you to talk about these issues, especially when you're not being come out of it?
Flo's was the question was because I'm from Taiwan, in the perspective of Chinese immigrant, why am I talking about the issues that related to Native Hawaiians? I think all of us, most of us who come to here from elsewhere, should be aware of the current issues and the history of the place, and what was done wrong. Reflect upon that and really think about what we can do to make it right. What can be done to make it right?
Race is very rural.
I think most people just want it. Well,
It's a same person
I think part of it probably me as a painter needs to diverse the different look of the facial expression or facial features. I did try to incorporate different races of people in the painting. For instance, this person is more of probably African American descent, and this probably more Filipino descent, and you know, European descent, Hawaiian descent. All try to incorporate different people in this painting to again. I forgot who was commenting on the positivity, bring the positivity into this.
I think what you're saying though, are the facial features is similar with each of the people,
Mhm.
and maybe is that a, you know, you use savage as a kind of stylization that's curvy. And I know that you have a kind of stylization, so it's a stylization of form. You know, you're talking about that idea of stylizing, going back to savage and making faces similar to each other.
Well, I didn't specifically make a conscious choice on that. That's probably just come out that way. Yeah, because I didn't really look at have a model for each person. A lot of them are imagined features.
So this is a process. So I don't know if anyone else sees it, but I see some dripping or lines in that. Was that like your underpainting, or was that intentional for you to kind of make it come through?
First question was, she see some of the dripping coming through the painting. That was conscious choice. Was done actually after the fact. So afterwards, I had a comment by artist that the painting was too pretty in a bad way, because the subject matter is it's not about prettiness. Well, artwork is not really about prettiness. It's not home decor. So in an attempt to unpretty it, I put a rag with the black paint and wipe all over the place, and also dripped some black paint over. And
You're also about oil, right? The oil spills that are in that place.
yeah, and the water probably didn't come through that the oil spill aspect. Originally, I tried to incorporate the recent event, the Red Hill oil spill into the water, but yeah, and the drip does kind of convey that message of the oil.
Can you talk a bit about how the red, yellow, and green is present in different ways in the painting? The painting on the left, primarily it's written on the flag, and then on the right, the red, yellow, and green is the cleaning up the reclamation of the water. I find it's really interesting that the yellow went a bit more neon, and it's that yellow work shirt that we see all the time here.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about that.
So thank you for asking that question. Wendy's question was the choice of the color of yellow, red, and the green. Interesting that in Eugene Savage's painting, actually from history, we learn yellow is actually represent royalty, because the cape that king was wearing is made of these feathers from this bird. They only plucked a few from each bird to make the cape, so very precious. And so the yellow was representation of royalty, but today we see yellows was worn by workers, construction workers, volunteers, or cleaning crew. That also reflect on the Kanaka's flag, which are the very earthy colors and the color of yellow, and I thought that change of meaning on the color was an interesting aspect.
Great question. Where we
like Diane girls were finished, she like put herself into the series.
For I think for this series, it does have potential to expand, but I would like to expand to travel posters. Those romanticized travel posters and always portray Hawaii as this paradise. And I think it will be really compelling, interesting way to engage the viewers, the reality of Hawaii in that this constructing of the beautiful Hawaii posters and into this contrary visual representation. I think the phone doesn't like me to continue.
and you've done some of those paintings, right?
Yes, I did, and it's not incorporated into this BFA show mainly because the space limitation.
Let's meet at the back wall for the Zoom people.
Okay.
So we are heading to the secret salon. On the way, we're passing Julie's work. And then maybe you can back all the way up and let's go all the way back. Okay, can you say somebody hold this? Congratulations. Everybody get in. Congratulations, BFA class 2023.